Again, good morning, good afternoon. It just became afternoon here out on the West Coast. We got Michigan friends, we got folks from Wisconsin, love it. Stockton, Ohio, Wisconsin, Vancouver, Washington, Arcadia, North Carolina. But hopefully we can get all 50 states, y'all. That'd be one of the highlights for this. All right, well, it's so good to see everybody. Again, just some quick housekeeping. Thank you so much for joining us for this final session in our professional development webinar series. It's been really fun to partner with Xello and hopefully provide some resources for you and your communities as we embark on this very, very busy fall application season. We have left some time, Ryan and I, for some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, again, use that Q&A feature, chats for just letting us know how talking with folks. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you via email. We also have some really great resources that Xello is going to send out later this week, so keep an eye on your inboxes for that. To give you a little bit of an overview about who we are, this is kind of a triad partnership on this webinar today between Xello, Collegewise, and the Common App. For those of you that don't know, Xello was started in 1997 and is really focused on helping students with post-secondary options, whether that's college or career, or just really being ready for their futures. There's thousands of districts and millions of students that they support, and the programs are used from kindergartners all the way through 12th grade students in terms of helping them with applications and getting ready for their futures after they graduate. My name is Nicole Pilar and I'm from Collegewise. We are an independent education consulting company. We've been around for 20 years now. We started with one counselor helping with families at the kitchen table, and now we have over 60 counselors and 40 tutors that work with a bunch of students across the United States and the world. One of the things that I love about the work that we do is we work very hard to try to create sane application processes for our students. One of the things that we may be known a little bit in your neck of the woods for is our guide to the common application that we put out every year, which you'll be getting a download link for that later this week. And then of course, we've got the Common App, which I'm pretty excited about. If you are looking for inspiration for Halloween, I think that they are always a pretty great costume for the counseling staff. Maybe a little bit scary for some of your seniors, but hopefully not too much. And the Common Application is a beloved resource that was founded over 40 years ago. It was one application initially with 15 schools, and now there's over 900 institutions that accept the Common Application, and it is an incredible resource. And I'm so happy to have a member of their team, Ryan, here with us to hopefully go through some of those changes and what's new this year that counselors should know in order to support their students. So quick agenda for today. We're going to start off with some of those updates for the Common App, things that have changed just so that you're able to kind of help your students as they go through the app. We'll also talk a little bit about the different components of the application, how you as counselors and should help your students and hopefully give them some insight into the different parts of the application. I think especially now that we are in a kind of, I don't want to say post-COVID because it keeps continuing process, but the application does have so many opportunities for students to be able to demonstrate their story and their narrative and their skill set. And so talking about some of those major opportunities is something we'll want to talk about today. And then Darcy from Xello is going to come on and talk a little bit about Common App and Xello's integration. And then we'll round up with some resources to help your students as we really go into October here and with deadlines looming around the corner. So with that, I am going to pass it off to Ryan to kind of help walk us through some of those changes that are occurring.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Gleach. I'm the Partner Services Manager at Common App, and I have been at Common App for over 10 years, working in applicant and recommender support before moving over to help support our great partners. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the counseling community and using our application. Nicole, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll get started with some of the changes. So here's just a quick update. We do have a whole lot of new members that joined the Common App this year, joining our over 980, I think, members, member colleges as part of the application. And as you can see there, we are in all 50 states. These new members are new members in 23 states, and we do have 63 international schools as well in 19 countries. So yeah, these are some of the new schools. Yeah, and all the highlight to Illinois. All of the public universities in Illinois have joined this year, so it's fantastic to see. Well, Nicole, if you move on to the next slide there. So the Common App has started an annual process that we're calling evolving the application, and it's basically we take time to collect feedback from our applicants, from our counselors and teachers, and from the community at large on changes on how we can make the application more student friendly, more inclusive. So these are a summary of some of the changes that have taken place this year. I'll just call attention to a couple. The updates to the sex and gender questions to allow for students to express a wider range of their gender identity. And then we also remove the school disciplinary question from the common portion of the Common App. Our member colleges can choose to add that question to their member questions page, but it has been removed from the application, the common portion of the application itself. And we'll move on to the next slide. So some of the changes to the personal essay, we did replace one of the essay questions. And as you can see there, there's the new prompt that we have available this application year regarding gratitude. So that is one of the changes that we've made. And on the right there, you can see there's kind of like a breakdown of how many students chose the previous essay prompts. Topic of your choice, always very popular, coming in at 24% there. Yeah, so those are some of the changes to the change rather to the personal essay. And then just some smaller changes, tweaks, things like that to the testing section. We added some new tests to the list of standardized tests that we support. We also removed some of the older SAT tests as they sort of became less relevant to students filling out the application. We updated some of our language around current year courses, and updated our courses and grades to helpfully try to help applicants understand what courses and grades is, and sort of ease that introduction to courses and grades. So mostly just text updates, things like that. Yes, and so we do have some recommender updates as well. We made a pretty significant change to the optional report in terms of trying to get a better understanding of why a counselor is submitting the optional report. So instead of being presented right with all of the questions on the optional report, you now select the reasons that you are submitting the optional report and then provide the corresponding information. So it helps create a more compact report and also gets right to the heart of why you're submitting the optional report. It's to update the transcript or to provide an updated counselor recommendation, things like that. We've also added an expanded capability for a second optional report. So we are now supporting that option for counselors. We made some, along with the change in the application to remove the disciplinary questions, we also removed the school discipline question from the school report. And we also added support for Cambridge courses to the school profile. So if your school has those courses, like you can for AP and IB courses, you can now indicate that your school supports those courses. And down there at the bottom, well, I don't know if the link is going to come through, but I can send that link to Nicole and she can include it in a message perhaps. But we do have a What's New webinar that we did back in June that is a whole webinar that just goes through everything that I just talked to you about in the last few minutes. Um, so if you want to go even more in depth with that recording, I can provide that link to you all for some additional details if you're curious. And I think that is everything. So back to you, Nicole.
Who wouldn't be curious about diving more deeply into the Common App, Ryan? Well, okay, so thank you so much to Ryan. I think it's, one of the things that I love so much about Common App is that they really try very hard to give students so many opportunities, and especially on the school counseling side. I think the optional report, given the fact that we are in a COVID year, is something that I hope that, schools and counselors will be able to utilize to support students appropriately. So let's kind of transition over to talking about some of the components of the application. And I think the main outcome here is really how can these different parts of the application help inform students in terms of being able to give all of that contextualized information to the Office of Admissions of the school that they're applying to. I think especially given that this is a COVID year, I was just at NACAC, and one of the big takeaways that I got from talking to a lot of the admissions officers there was just how much the context for being able to review apps, especially given that we are in a test optional world, can be something truly helpful and really change the game sometimes for students when they have that information. So I figured we would go through some of the different aspects of the application, not every single thing, because there's apparently a whole other presentation for that with Common App, but these are the areas that that I feel are most helpful, that we as counselors can really encourage students to complete to the most contextualized extent possible. So a few of the big ones that I always like to highlight are the demographic information section on the applications. This is on that Common App tab. The first is family information. A lot of the information that a student inputs in that tab is optional, but being able to provide that additional context, maybe your parent, unfortunately due to COVID, had a shift in job availability, or maybe as a family member was disabled as a result of COVID, being able to indicate some of these as options on the family information and potentially use additional information sections of the app to highlight is something that can be really helpful when a reader is reviewing the application. Also looking and seeing, are you a first-gen student? That is definitely something that if a school is trying to identify populations of students that they want to support, having this section and being able to indicate that from whether or not a student answers those questions can be something really helpful. I think the other thing too is acknowledging that student identity is a very personal thing. And so being able to have certain sections of that tab be optional really allows the student to give control over what type of information that they want to share. Some students do not want to share their ethnic background, or they maybe don't know their parents' school information, and so having the option to either provide that or not is certainly something that when counseling students, if that is something that is a part of their narrative and will be important from could add value to their application, certainly encouraging them to either take advantage of that or maybe not, depending on what the circumstances are. Geography and nationality, especially in regards to DACA status and students that are maybe here in the United States on certain visa opportunities, things like that. As Ryan mentioned, there's been some changes in terms of how that information is presented on the Common Application this year, and it's purposely designed to help allow students that are maybe not U.S. citizens to be able to represent where they come from and their background. I know a number of students sometimes will have dual citizenship, and so helping them and encouraging them to present that information if it would be helpful can certainly, again, add additional dimension to their application. But the big thing I think in the demographic section of the app that I always like to draw to, especially in a post-COVID or really continuation COVID world, is that on the fee waiver section, a lot of students, there's 8 different options that a student can take advantage of. I highlighted I can provide a supporting statement from a school official, college access counselor, financial aid officer, or community leader. Given that, there are a number of students whose families were affected financially or otherwise due to COVID, it can be those application fees absolutely add up. I think I'm out here in California, and I believe Stanford is $90 or $95 to apply to. I believe USC is $85, and that's a lot of money, particularly if a family was hit heavy by COVID. Really, natural disasters, for instance, in certain parts of the country are certainly on the rise. And so I think for some students, they may feel that they do not qualify for fee waiver status because they do not fit 1 through 7 options. And so being able to maybe have a question on the brag sheet that you may ask students to do as part of their counseling letter of rec packet can certainly be a way to potentially mitigate that effect and allow them to kind of, should they decide that they want to apply for financial aid, that supporting statement can be really helpful. And again, be another way for students to be able to demonstrate a little bit about their narrative and the circumstances. The education section. I think with COVID, I know different districts had different policies. Some students may have been moved to the virtual online platform within your district or your school environment. And so being able to report the high school information is something that can, again, provide that context as to how the school or the district responded regarding COVID. I have a number of students that are, this year, even though they went to the same high school, homeschool, on the transcript, it indicates that they were on at a digital platform, like the online virtual academy or whatever for their district. And so I think providing those details for the schools themselves, if there was a change or if on the transcript it's not clear that virtual school or that other school option that they took advantage of maybe during the pandemic, being able to put that context on, the details as to why you left that school, so to speak, can be something from a reader perspective that really helps lay out the understanding of the transcript. Again, there's other parts of the application where this type of information, if this doesn't auto-populate for a student, that can be helpful. Additional info is, of course, one of the good ones. But I always like to highlight, because students, there has been challenges within the transcripts and making sure that if there is any indication that they maybe went to a different school, that can be a place to help clarify that for the reader. I think the other thing as well is the grades tab within the Common App. A lot of those questions are optional. I know a lot of students, they may not necessarily know what their weighted GPA is, or they don't know if the school ranks or whatnot. I think that, again, context is always a really helpful thing from a reader perspective, and being able to say, how many students are at your high school, how many kids are in your graduating class, what does your school do a weighted GPA? But I would also caution, sometimes students, that information is something that may be better gleaned straight from the transcript as opposed to just reporting it. Also, a number of schools may do their own internal calculations. So I think this is an option where when I talk to my students, I ask them, do you have access to this information? Is that something that you can see maybe on an official transcript or things like that? And if not, then maybe leave it blank for now. Current or most recent year courses, I think a lot of students sometimes find that they don't want to report their whole course schedule. I've seen for a lot of students, they'll just do their academic classes. And I certainly, obviously we want academic classes on there, but making sure that students demonstrate the full extent of their schedule. Maybe they have PE or sport, or maybe they're taking an online class or a community college. Being able to detail out what the course schedule is going to be for that year can be something really helpful. If you have a student that maybe is taking a course through an online provider or is taking a class at a local community college or a college near you, one of the things that I've seen with students is they'll list the name of the course and they'll put @ and whatever the institution is, so that it's clear for the reader that that is a separate school, but it's still part of the courses that they've got planned for the whole school year. And of course, they would indicate that other school on the other sections of the education tab on the Common App. The last section I think that a lot of students sometimes struggle with is the honors tab on the Common App education section. It asks specifically for academic achievements. And sometimes I think there's a little bit of confusion as to, oh my gosh, if I don't have anything in that section, am I at a disadvantage? Different high schools have different policies. I know that some of your schools may participate in scholar athlete awards or book awards or things like that, and others maybe don't have necessarily those opportunities as much. And so I always encourage students to not be afraid if there's nothing in that section. That certainly doesn't mean that you're at a disadvantage or anything, but being able to, again, provide that context. Sometimes it's a school award, and so using that additional information section to give context as to why that student won the award or what the circumstances were. Maybe that's something that they list in the activities section. There are 5 spaces for those academic honors, and they can be internal within a school community or a region, but also as well as state. I would say, for me, I think academic can be, it will depend upon the school environment. Let's say debate is a actual class period at your school. I would say that, yeah, that's absolutely an academic award. But if it's maybe a club outside of school, then it's a little bit trickier, just because how do you define academic? I'll admit, me personally, I think that it should be a little bit of a looser definition, and it really does depend upon the student as to how full their application is. If they have all 10 spots on the activity section, for instance, filled out, then maybe it makes more sense to kind of put that accolade within the honors section. Let's talk about testing. Yay, everyone's favorite topic. Just kidding, right? It's been a real treat this year with testing. One of the things that I love about the Common App that I think sometimes some students don't realize is that they can actually toggle the testing tab on and off. So for instance, let's say that there are a number of schools that they do not want to have testing, they want to apply test optional to. They can actually go into the testing tab of the Common App, delete the tests, maybe SAT, ACT, that they do not want to show, and then submit those application. If they go back to the app itself and decide that they want to continue to have testing, they can click those options, and every bit of data that they have entered previously will pop back up. So sometimes if a student has a list where they want to apply test blind or test free, and then they also have schools that they want to apply test for, they can go in and again delete that data from the Common App, but it will still save it on the back end, so they don't have to go through the labor of re-entering all of that information. The other thing I think is about looking at what types of questions are they going to be doing with testing consideration. I see a number of students that are sometimes confused because when the student goes to the member questions that are related to that school, so looking at, Purdue, for instance, where they may have a question asking, would you like your test scores to be in consideration? Sometimes when a student will go to review the application itself, the school will say, we're not going to consider testing, and it will look blank. So I think the big thing with students is helping them know what is your application game plan for what schools you'd like to apply with testing or without testing, if you do have a test score, and just keeping track of if they are going to self-report that information on the app itself, keeping track of who wants what. The other thing too is, again, reminding them and thinking about, are you answering the question within the member questions correctly? I find that some students will read through that so quickly that they don't realize that the school may be asking, would you like your application to be read without testing, and they thought it was with testing, and they answered the question either yes or no when they meant the opposite. A couple of great resources that I have up on the screen here. Fairtest.org is a fantastic organization that is keeping track of all of the schools in the United States that have test-free or test optional policies. They also have a great list for students in the class of 2023 that they've started to develop. So if you're talking with your juniors, that's a great place. All the resources are up there. This is the test optional list. And then Compass Prep also has a really great chart. It's not exhaustive, but it's a great place for students to start to see which schools will accept self-reported scores, because as we know, those test scores are not cheap to send. I believe ACT is $14 a score send or something nuts if a student doesn't qualify for those fee waivers. All right. Activity section. I love the activity section. It's one of my favorites. It is beautifully flexible, but also kind of limiting sometimes for students that may have, they do lots and lots of clubs or lots and lots of activities. The big tips that I always recommend students be considering is that it's okay to show personality. I think particularly when it comes to things like sports or other types of activities that are a little bit more ubiquitous, not explaining what track is to the admissions officer, but maybe what events that you've done, what types of, accolades or awards, or, maybe what is your proudest moment. You're limited with 150 characters. So the other thing that I encourage students to realize is that abbreviations are okay. For instance, you might want to put with a W and a dot, or maybe and is like the and symbol, for instance. Helping them manage and make use of those character counts as much as possible will be really helpful in the sense of being able to pack as much information within those descriptions. I know how frustrating that can sometimes be, especially in the sense that 150 characters is not a lot of space. So when I talk to admissions officers, one of the things that they emphasize is they have thousands of applications they have to read. So really making sure that students are listing those activities in order of importance for them allows them to get to know the student to the best of their ability within the limited time that they may have to review that application. And just on the opposite end of the spectrum, less can sometimes be more. Maybe you have a student that really only does 4 things, but they do them exceptionally well. I joke with students and say, Serena Williams, that amazing tennis superstar, she does one thing very, very well. So the bulk of her extracurricular sections are probably going to be dedicated to tennis and maybe charitable pursuits if she was applying to college right now. And so I think sometimes students feel like they have to, fill every single slot out of the 10, and it's okay to have, maybe 6 things that you done throughout the course of high school, because you work part-time and it's really hard to be in 10 different clubs if you're working part-time. The other thing I think is important is that hobbies count too, particularly because of the pandemic, when so many things for this class was put on pause. A lot of students may have picked up hobbies or done things digitally that they may not realize technically count as extracurriculars. I had a student that got really into, was a very, very passionate biology student and got really into gardening during the pandemic and didn't realize that working on his garden 4 hours a week absolutely counts as an activity. And that he actually wrote a beautiful essay about that. You may have had students that took online coursework through maybe edX or Coursera, or helped do virtual volunteering opportunities. Certainly, I think helping students realize that the things that you did maybe that don't have that formal structure can absolutely count towards these sections. The other thing is also helping them, maybe there was an extracurricular that they were planning on doing, or that something that paused or stopped due to COVID. Using those activity descriptions, if they have the character count to put, stop due to COVID, will help again give that context to the reader to be able to fully understand, maybe why that activity didn't continue when it, might not necessarily be super, super obvious. The other thing I always encourage students to be mindful of is the hours as well. I always hear from kind of more persnickety admissions officers that seeing students put 168 hours for 1 week of a camp. Certainly, yes, they were at camp for 168 hours if they were sleeping there, but also kind of, counting more waking hours. You always hear these stories about certain schools that will add up the hours, and I do know folks that have occasionally done that to just verify that a kid actually is sleeping and eating and breathing and talking to their parents every so often. So I think something that sometimes students miss is they either undercount or they overcount. And so looking at, the averages as well is something helpful. This is a document. We are going to send this out to you all at the end of this week. This is an activity summary document that we at Collegewise have for our students. I certainly hope that it will be something helpful for you all. This is a snippet of it. I think that this is a really great representation of what maximizing those character limits on the Common App can look like for different types of activities. One of the things that I always encourage students to think about is how much data or information are you giving within that character account. And so certainly, again, using semicolons, not using full sentences, putting things in parentheses, using abbreviations with the wind ensemble, using some of that character space to kind of also show a little bit of the humanity with the found the guitar due to my love of classic rock, those types of things. Those are really great opportunities for students to kind of showcase their personality within the writing portion of the application, just because the activity section is something they have control over. So there's a whole document related to this that has guidelines and examples and things that Darcy and Megan and the team at Xello will send out, along with the other resources that we talk about today, that hopefully you can send. It's also a great doc to convert to a Google Doc. I find for younger students, it's a great place for them to start keeping track of all of the amazing, cool things that they have done in high school, just because it can be a challenge, certainly sometimes, to remember the things that you did freshman year when you're a senior. I don't know about you all, but trying to remember what I did pre-pandemic is a little bit of a challenge. So that's kind of, in terms of the activity summary, some of the things that hopefully can be helpful for students now that we're in a COVID time. Community disruptions. This is a relatively new addition to the Common application. I believe the first year was the last year, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan. And there's now, 2 questions in terms of what I like to call the additional information sections of the application. This question pops up when a student finishes inputting their Common App personal statement, and it's in that second tab on that page. And so in the additional information section, there's 2 of those options. The first that will come up is this community disruptions. It was purposely called community disruptions as well, not just because of COVID, but because, unfortunately, as we've seen in the last few years, natural disasters have become an unfortunate occurrence for many of our students, depending on what part of the country that they are living in. And so the question is completely optional for students. It's a 250 word limit. It's separate from, again, that general additional information section. And, if COVID or, other types of community disruptions happen within your school community, of course, you all are encouraged on the counseling forms to detail those out. So things like the grading policy changes that may have happened, or access to technology for certain students, those types of things. The general advice that I always like to tell students is, with the COVID and natural disasters question, that 250 word one, it's really designed to be more specific. So really help them understand what happened that, was related to these things like natural disasters. For instance, I always also like to tell students, read the room. everybody experienced COVID particularly, but the way in which individuals experienced COVID was very, very different. So if you were a student where, you had reliable internet access, your family's income wasn't necessarily super affected, health was pretty much okay, it might not necessarily be to your advantage to answer that question, but certainly there are a number of students that maybe had to take a part-time job because their parents, maybe lost their position and they needed income. Or I'm from California, and unfortunately in my hometown, we get wildfires every year. And there were a lot of kids that were very, very displaced as a result of not being able to have a home to go back to. And so certainly, I think I always like to tell students if it's not on the application, it doesn't exist. And so if there were things in the school community, I know especially as counselors, some of the things that can be helpful for students is there a little blurb maybe that you can send out to students that indicates what were the grading policies that they may be able to copy and paste in the application. This is a great section for that. Additional information I find is something that's great for just more general information. It's kind of like that black box, but again, encouraging students to use that judiciously. 650 words is a lot of words, but certainly do not use all 650 words. I don't think I've ever had a student use a full or seen a full 650 word application submitted. This can be a great place for that additional activity context. It can be a fantastic opportunity for students to maybe highlight, maybe there was an impact in terms of a grade on their transcript that they would like to explain the story behind a little bit more, or maybe their school has a very unique program or opportunity on campus that needs a little bit more explanation than just what's on the activity section. Or maybe this is a student that wasn't able to take advantage of a certain class because there were conflicts with their band, their band orchestra class that they really, really wanted to be in. And there's only one section of both of those things and they had to choose. I think encouraging students to utilize those spaces appropriately, but also thoroughly, so that way their applications get a fair read. I find that a lot of information sometimes for students that is really relevant to their application, but they don't necessarily believe that it is. And encouraging them to make use of these spaces. Again, that doesn't mean that they need to explain every single little thing. So it's kind of like a balancing act, but certainly given the kind of environment that we have all experienced within the last year, helping them and maybe giving some of that language and those phrases if there's anything particular to your school community, things like special programs or grading policies, etc. And then, of course, there's the member questions. So these are the college-specific questions on the common application. Like we mentioned in the previous section, that kind of test score consideration, a lot of schools will have a separate question asking students if they would like their scores to be considered or would they like their scores not to be considered. So encouraging students to really read carefully that question. I think sometimes, especially if a student is applying to a lot of Common App schools, your eyes kind of start to bleed when you're like reading through all the member questions. And so being careful when reading through everything a couple of times. The other is a number of schools will allow students to submit an optional resume. That being said, again, it's kind of similar to additional information. In admissions, there's a phrase, the thicker the file, the thicker the kid. So the more information that they're adding, sometimes the more difficult it is to understand who that student is. I think I've only had maybe 2 students ever need to submit a resume because they were able to use either a combination of additional information or that activity summary to really reiterate what it is that they did. Colleges, again, it is optional. So I don't think that students, if there is truly additional activities or context or things where you didn't have space to expand upon, certainly that's a great opportunity. And then a number of schools will ask students if they have a digital presence that they'd like to emphasize. Maybe, they have a shop on Etsy where they sell homemade jewelry. That's certainly a great place to throw that. Or maybe they're a YouTube star. Maybe they're like super famous on that Twitch gaming platform or something. That might be a great place for them to include that to kind of augment their application a little bit. The other thing that I always like to kind of also point out I live in Orange County out here in California, so I call them the hidden Mickey questions. A lot of students will sometimes find as they're getting ready to submit an application, they're filling out the member questions. And of course, then they realize, oh my God, there's an additional essay that I wasn't necessarily prepared for because of the way that they answered one of those questions. And so encouraging students to go and fill out those member questions, ahead of time, so that way there aren't any surprises. And that way they can also see what will the essay workload look like for that school. There's nothing worse than the day of the deadline and filling out the app and realizing, oh my God, I have another 500-word response that I have to write in 3 hours. I think we all know that generally speaking, students don't necessarily write that as strong as they could within a 3-hour period before a deadline. The courses and grades tab, not every school requires courses and grades. So if your school has an interesting bell schedule or school schedule, certainly, if you are able to provide guidance to students as to what type of schedule they should indicate to complete that courses and grades section correctly. I also know that on the Common Application, if it is if it's a college that they took coursework at, it's not as easy to add that information. So I certainly always encourage students, if a school requires that courses and grades tab and if there is coursework that you have not been able to list on that courses and grades tab, using that additional information to list what those courses were when you took it and also the grade that you received for the course, in addition to sending off the transcript if that's required. And then, of course, like Ryan mentioned earlier, the disciplinary history question has been removed from the general Common Application questions, but a number of members have added that as a requirement for their own institutional questions. And so making sure that students know that even if that question isn't required by the Common Application, they may still need to answer that and have an explanation prepared if the answer is yes to any of those questions. All right, and then recommenders. I think especially given, again, all of the kind of changes that have occurred in the last 18 months, helping students really augment their application, provide additional context, and encourage them to use the different recommender options. Certainly the counselor form, the counselor, documentation is sent by counseling staff. Different schools will require whether they allow teacher letters of recommendation, how many, and then there's a number of other recommender categories. Certainly, depending on your state and your district, some schools were in person relatively most of last year. For some schools, they weren't in person really at all last year. And so I think if there are other recommenders in that student's life, maybe a mentor or a coach or a boss or a club advisor, that certainly can be a great letter of recommendation if that school allows that other recommender category. Common App purposely extended the number of different categories that are allowed. Other is pretty ubiquitous. I think it's allowed at most schools. And so helping students realize that there are other perspectives outside the classroom that may be valuable to understanding their identity and their place within their communities. And so being able to provide those things. The other fun feature that I love in the Common Application is the advisor feature. Students can go in that recommenders and FERPA tab and add the information of advisors, up to 3 that can actually go in and view their application. You can't make any changes and they don't submit any forms, but it can help the student, it's kind of like almost like a bird's eye view of like where that student is, and will also give them a PDF copy so they can review. So if you have a student where you'd like to see where they are in the Common Application, that's a great feature to help see what their progress is and how they're doing, and be able to answer any questions that they may have based off of their progress. All right, Darcy, you are going to come on and talk about Common App and Xello integration.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. My name is Darcy. I'm the product marketing manager at Xello. So yes, in last year, we teamed up with Common App in order to create an integrated application management experience. So this really led us to kind of 3 big buckets that we were trying to solve. If you wouldn't mind going to the next tab, perfect. So the first one is the Sync student accounts. So through this integration, students can actually request counselors and teacher forms directly through Xello. So with this, they would sync their account, and with that as well, the colleges that they choose in Common App will now appear in their Xello account. And that centralized spot for documents requests, again, that's really going back to, as they apply for those applications, they can request their counselor forms and those teacher evaluations directly through Xello. So again, to streamline that experience for them. And the last part of this integration is also the one-stop shop for application tracking. So what this means is now a counselor and teacher, once this integration is activated, they no longer have to access Common App. So everything they do will be done directly through Xello. So that includes looking at student requests, that includes completing those requests, and then actually being able to track them directly through Xello. Moving to the next slide, we see a little bit more of what this actually looks like. So this is looking at the student experience. So as you can see here, student, when they want to go request a teacher evaluation, for example, will be able to pull up all the teachers at their school and submit their request again directly through Xello. And once they do this, the teacher will actually receive an email notification. So again, that they're very much aware that they have gotten this request from a student. Once they do this, the student will actually be able to see through the college application tab in Xello, again, be able to track what teacher evaluation requests that they've already sent. They'll also see the maximum and minimum at each school. So for example, if a college allows 2 teacher recommenders, they'll actually see that in their list as well. So again, that they're aware of what they can, what they can action. With that as well, they'll see a similar for counselor form. So again, they'll be able to choose their counselor from a list of requests. And again, with that action request as well, which you see there on the right-hand side. From the teacher's point of view, again, well, I should say from a teacher and counselor point of view, again, as soon as that request happens on the student side, they will get an email notification. So again, it's easy for you guys to track what you actually have to action. And then once you jump into Xello, counselors and teachers will be able to submit their profile again, so they can start actioning those students' requests. You can see here on the screen some examples of the reporting that will be available. So again, you can see exactly where in the process the counselor form is, for example. So you can see once it's been submitted to Common App and once it's been seen by the institution. So again, that you can feel easy knowing exactly where in the process the form is. And then with that as well, again, it gives you a recap of all of your students. So again, you can see all of the requests in one position. So you understand, okay, I have to action this form next, or I still have this form for this specific student. And on that note, I will actually pass it back to Nicole to walk through the different resources we have available.
Okay, Ryan, I think it is, you're going to talk about some of the cool Common App specific stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the resources that we really want to encourage you to check out is our Common App Ready, which is a toolkit of resources and documents and things like that to really jumpstart your understanding of the Common App and the application process and the recommendation process as well. So there's all sorts of great like worksheets and things like that that are available at Common App Ready, commonapp.org/ready. So encourage you to go check that out. And it really is everything from from the very basics, right? What is Common App if you're not familiar with Common App? How everything works, and then going through to all the way through to financial aid and resources to help students understand how they can pay for college. So definitely give that a look, and take what you need, leave what what you don't need. But if there's there's lots of great ideas there. So encourage you to check that out and use whatever you can there for you and your students. Yeah, and that's a screenshot of the application dictionary, helping folks get used to some of the Common App terms that they may not be familiar with, or not really Common App terms, but just college application terms as well. Yeah. And so we also have a number of other resources. We do have a number of video tutorials on our YouTube page. And we also have our applicant and recommender support centers. So those are appsupport.commonapp.org and recsupport.commonapp.org. So you can go to those sites. You can also just click, go to commonapp.org and click on help at the bottom of the page, and you'll get to the Solution Center pages, but those have a number of FAQs and things like that to help folks out with common issues that they may run into while they're filling out the application or interacting with recommendations. Do want to highlight a couple of things here. We do have on the Applicant Solution Center, there is a writing requirements tab to help point out those hidden Mickeys that Nicole mentioned. So you can go there and look at any one of the members listed there, and we list out whether or not the college requires the Common App essay, and what other optional or additional writing questions that they may have on their member questions page. So you can go, work with a student, see what schools are on their list, and then go check out this writing requirements page and see, okay, what essays may should you plan to write, based on, what options they may select when they get to the application. And then also what applications or what colleges accept the Common App. 979 colleges. It's definitely not all colleges. So if there are colleges that that students are interested in, you can check out a list there. We also have a college search on the main Common App website, and then there's a college search within the application itself that can help students locate the colleges that they may be interested in applying to.
One thing that I will mention, Ryan, before we kind of jump ahead, this is these resources that Ryan's talking about are fantastic for juniors in the spring. I know it may seem like there's no light at the end of the tunnel right now, but in the spring, it's really helpful as students are starting to think about their list. They maybe want to kind of start a common application account that will roll over in August, being able to kind of see who accepts the common application, but also how many essays and what does that workload look like maybe as they go into the summer. I find that the Student Solution Center has so many incredible tools that can also be used if you kind of think about with the juniors as they're leaving, maybe it's something during AP season or whatever, being able to help students kind of plan summer, but also for fall to kind of lessen the stress that can occur. I think I'm obviously, I think all of us are big fans of planning, and so encouraging students to utilize some of these things as they think about their own application timeline, even as a younger student. The last resource, and this is something that I'm really, really proud of, and maybe because I worked on it, is Collegewise puts out every year our guide to how to make your Common App a lot less common. This is something that we produce for students. It walks through literally how do you create an account to every single section on the Common application. It gives advice and tips and tricks. It's about 68 or 72 pages. Forgive me, somewhere in between there. And it's just chock full of advice. And all of you will be getting a link for that as a download later this week. I sincerely hope that you pass along to your students. It's something that we put out every year and update in partnership with some of our friends at Common App. So with that being said, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into Q&A. We have the whole team here from Xello to Collegewise to Common App, so hopefully we'll be able to tackle a few of these. Okay, let's see. What type of information would a school official have or can confirm that would warrant such a letter? I think, Cynthia, you're referring to the fee waiver part that we talked about on slide, what is it, regarding the demographic information. I think, when it comes to fee waiver status and whether or not a student qualifies for that, I think that, sometimes when the options that they're given about whether a student's on free reduced lunch or the student qualifies for SNAP benefits, there may be students that may be on paper, just due to the way that inclusion within those programs work, they may look like they qualify or they don't qualify for those things. But, I had a student a couple of years ago where on paper, her family looked very, very fine. But her mom was actually battling her third bout of cancer, and they had quite a bit of debt as a result of that. And so one of the things that she shared with her school counselor is that they were in the process of applying for federal aid, and that was a challenge. And so her school counselor was able to kind of look at the documentation and verified that the family's financial situation was actually a lot more difficult. And they provided documentation to the schools when they ultimately applied for financial aid as well. And so I think sometimes helping students know that if there are financial circumstances that may warrant that, or other things that maybe don't easily fit some of those other categories, that can certainly be something that might warrant a letter in that regard. Can students qualify for fee waivers if the entire school/district is on free and reduced lunch, even if the student's family income does not qualify for a fee waiver? That's a great question, Jose. I would say, that would be, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
Sorry, I can answer that. The answer is no. It's based on the eligible income level of the student. So it's not a full scope thing. It's based on that particular applicant. Yeah,
that's what I think. There's definitely districts where that is a qualification, but you're right, it is individual. Then maybe that's an individual that, again, doesn't necessarily qualify for free reduced lunch by their own income guidelines, but there might be other circumstances that may warrant kind of an additional letter, but justification from the counselor side. Elizabeth, where should a one-time College Now course be reported? For example, students takes a college level class as a high school junior. So I would say they're going to want to report, okay, well, there's a couple circumstances that kind of come to mind. One is if the course is offered as a dual enrollment through the high school, the student would want to indicate how they want to report that as either a college level class or a high school level class, but it's something on the high school transcript and it's accepted for high school graduation requirements, then I would say it is a high school level class. But this is where potentially like additional information or information within the counselor documents to kind of qualify, these are actually courses that are offered as dual enrollment and they also count towards our high school graduation requirements. Different universities will have policies as to whether they will count them as college level credit or they'll do it more towards high school. I know out here in California, a student has to pick which way it wants to be reported. Either it has to be a college level class or has to be high school. And most of the time they pick high school if it's towards those graduation requirements from a high school level. If they do take the class and it's posted on their high school transcript and they're completing the courses and grades tab, then they would want to indicate that on that courses and grades tab. Ryan, am I missing anything from your end?
No, that's a great summary. Yeah, the shorthand is if it's on the transcript, it can go in courses and grades. If it's not on the transcript, then it can be listed in current year courses, or it can be listed in current year courses if they're not using courses and grades. And then of course there's also additional information, which is sort of the catch-all, right? If there's something that doesn't quite fit, it can always go there. So, yep.
Will outside recommenders be able to submit to Xello friends? I'm not sure.
So answer here. So one thing to note is students still complete the majority of their things directly in Common App. So similar to what Nicole and Ryan talked about, like they'll be answering, again, all the standard Common App questions directly there. So it truly is just the counselor forms and teacher recommenders that they are requesting through Xello. But that being said, and thank you, Mark, for asking this question, any other recommenders, so whether that's like a mentor or maybe it's a coach, those will actually still be done directly through Common App. So again, normally, or right now, say you do have the integration, if a student was to go to that recommender section, if they went to submit like a counselor form request, for example, or the teacher recommender, they would get a notice that they have to do this directly through Xello. But the other recommender is the one section that won't prompt them to do that directly through Xello.
Yes, that'll be a request that when the student inputs the other recommender information, the other recommender will get an email. I believe it's directly from Common App, Ryan, with the forms that they need to fill out. So the student should indicate to the other recommender that they will be looking for an email from Common App, not from Xello. Xello is for the school documents, whereas other recommender, because it can be individuals outside of the school setting, it will come from a different email address, essentially. All right. You guys all asked really good questions. I love this. If a principal submits a letter of rec instead of you, should I cut and paste it in the counselor recommendation section if I'm not doing the letter of rec? Anil, it looks like you're also going to be answering. You have some thoughts on that. What do you want to pop off mute and kind of tell us a little bit? What do you think?
Sorry, it was in the process of typing an answer, and I thought you were going to answer it here. But I think if I understand the question correctly, the question is asking if the principal submits a letter of rec for the student, but the counselor, this is for the counselor recommendation during the Common App application. The student should request the counselor or assign the counselor to complete that letter of recommendation, and only if they're requesting the principal for their teacher evaluation would the principal get the request to complete an LOR for that student. So there's two different recommendations that can be completed here. It's one either as a teacher evaluation or the one for the counselor recommendation. They're two separate forms, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think one of the things that can be helpful though, because especially again, given the fact that we don't know any, we don't know, but different districts had different access to students and levels of access to students in the last year with COVID and everything. I think as a counselor, if you feel like the principal can maybe speak to that student a little bit more, one of the things that can be helpful is in certain sections of that recommendation, if you want to put, additional remarks from our head of school, right, regarding XYZ student, and then, copy and paste that paragraph, that can be be helpful. And just kind of depends. If the principal though was not the teacher for the student, I probably wouldn't have the student add them as a teacher. If the principal wants to be added as an other letter of recommendation because they maybe have a relationship with the student or they're a club mentor or something like that, then that certainly could be another avenue. So I think it just kind of depends upon what is the relationship with the student, and where would you want to necessarily put that information for them best. Can Xello or Common App report if the student has submitted FAFSA? I do not believe that those systems are linked, unfortunately, as helpful as that would be. Darcy and Ryan, is that true?
Yeah, so we don't have, there's no integration with FAFSA or reporting of FAFSA status through Common App. But we're always open to feedback and great suggestions. So I'll be sure to take that home with me.
Ryan's been keeping a list.
Yeah, yep.
One question I'll answer from Nikki. So just to clarify, so the option to integrate obviously with Common App is optional through Xello. So there's a good chance that your school or district might not have opted in for that integration. So if that's the case, again, even if you have Xello and you haven't integrated, everything will be done through Common App. It's an additional feature. So if you don't see a Common App tile in the college planning section of your Xello account, that means your school and district is not associated with that integration.
This is a great question, Cynthia. Is the requirement to provide work in progress on transcript or provide a schedule a Common App requirement or Xello? Having us do that at the beginning of the year is a problem as our tech support has not completed some course data for our second semester. This will cause us students to have to correct their applications. I would say, so I think there's two aspects to this question. It's what is the student reporting, and then also what is the school reporting in terms of the documents that they are sending. The student should have their full, when they report their courses, their like current year courses on the Common App on their side, they should have the schedule for the whole year. If there's a change to that schedule, when they submit the application, one of the terms is that if there's a change in any of the information that they listed, whether they swap out a class or they drop a class or they add a class, they need to notify the schools that they have applied to. And so they can, email the school or reach out to their admissions officer if they know that person and indicate that change. In terms of the documents submitted on the school side, Darcy, do you want to kind of tackle that?
Yes. So on the school side, sorry, is this going to Cynthia's question or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Cynthia, to answer your question, again, like, can we designate really decision in Xello? So again, all of this will be done directly in Common App. So the steps that a student first will do, again, they'll answer the majority of these questions in Common App. So once they select, for example, early admissions through Common App or regular admission, that deadline will actually sync with Xello. So then they would see that within Xello. So if a student, for example, right now isn't seeing a deadline in their account, that probably means they haven't answered that question within Common App. So they'll actually have to go back in Common App, complete all those questions specific to that institution, and then that should, or that will show on the Xello side.
It looks like Cynthia clarified, as a counselor, Xello is forcing, the Xello platform is forcing you all to put work in progress courses for students. I believe that's the clarification there.
Work in progress. I'll have to follow up with you offline about that, Cynthia, just some clarification on that point. Normally things are like automatically tracked. So for example, like once you submit the transcript, for example, you will be able to see on your side. So maybe that's the question too. So right now you'll be able to see those reports on the student or the counselor side. So you'll be able to pull, okay, for like these three students, I've already submitted XYZ form. There might be some clarification, like you might have to communicate directly with the student to make sure that they're aware of that as well.
Okay. Looks like some of these are getting to be very, very specific. So hopefully we're able to kind of take down folks' information and be able to follow up individually with them, because we want to be mindful of y'all's time. So I think we'll probably just take this one last question just to wrap it up. Following up on Tobias's question and answer, if we are unable to see whether the student has waived their rights, if we need that information, will we need to request it from the students? I think within Xello.
Yes, you'll have to confirm with the student whether or not they have waived those rights.
Okay, perfect. All right, and then Nuri, it looks like one last question. I know I said one last. To access Xello, our students first have to access their school district Clever portal. That is where they will see the Xello tile and then sync to Common App. Is there a way to bypass this step?
To access Xello, our students first have to access their school. So I guess no, because Clever integration would be how they access Xello. So again, since it's like the integration is through Xello, they would have to use that in order to access Xello to again request those forms directly through Xello. So right now that would be the easiest way since it is a single sign-on solution. But again, I know there is a lot of Xello specific questions. So to Nicole's point, if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to help@xello.world, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions we didn't get to. And as well, you can go to our support site, type in Common App, and we have a ton of great resources there as well as a recording to some training specific about the Xello Common App integration, which again goes a little bit more into detail about these flows and hopefully will help answer any questions that you guys may have.
Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. I know that this is a very, very busy time and you chose to take part of your day for this. Hopefully it was helpful. Again, if you need any resources, we have some great stuff with the Common App. We've got some great stuff with Xello. There'll be some resources sent out later this week related to this presentation. But we hope you all are doing well and staying safe, and good luck for this application cycle to you and your communities. Thanks, everyone.